Some 20th century psychologists and sociologists came up with this idea that pre-modern people did not love their children or felt less attachment to their children. Now, just on the surface of this, without even really delving further into the issue, this just sounds absurd. I mean, why would people in the past feel less strongly about their children than they do today? There's this guy, Edward Shorter, who is a clinical science and medicine researcher on the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto, who came up with this really, what I think is just crazy sounding quote of, "Good mothering is an invention of modernization." Historian Linda Pollock had some observations about this. She has pointed out that these writers always seem to discover that children were treated better toward the start of the period that they themselves were studying, whether this was the 17th, 18th, or 19th century or whatever. She also points out that scholars who confine themselves to a specific period using primary sources from that period will tell you that children were loved and treated well. A medieval historian would laugh at the idea that children were not loved in the Middle Ages. Anybody who spent any kind of time with primary source material from the Middle Ages will tell you that children were loved, they were valued and cared for. Now, it's true that in the medieval era, we don't have the richly emotional material we might want to have to tell us about people's private lives and their feelings about their families. We don't have as much of it. It's harder to find, but if you dig and you look through our source material from the Middle Ages, you will find plenty of evidence of affection toward children. Infant mortality was quite a bit higher in the Middle Ages than it is today, and so infancy could be a dangerous time in a child's life. It was very important to medieval people that a newborn be baptized quickly. Priests strove to ensure that midwives were able to perform a baptism properly, so that if a baby at its birth seemed likely to die soon or was maybe in imminent danger of death, then that midwife could perform the proper baptism to ensure the safety of that child's soul. This was important because men were not allowed in the birthing chamber, so there would not have been a priest on hand immediately when that child was born. We have a lack of things like diaries, personal accounts, very personal letters from the Middle Ages. These things are scarce, and in particular, they're pretty much non-existent when we think of peasants, the peasant population. But one area where we can find good accounts for the feelings of peasant parents toward their children, we can look at the records of coroners. In fact, we have accounts of peasants in anguish after the death of a child, even if they had many other children. Of course, medieval peasants were mostly involved in farming, and a farm could be a dangerous place for a child. Older children, of course, were helping with the chores. We have accounts of parents trying to save children, like a father who jumped into a mill pond to try to save his drowned son. We have an account of a mother who dragged her son from a ditch to try to save him, although he had died. We even have an account of a father dying, fighting a man trying to rape his daughter. This is from a 14th century sermon which depicts the relationship between a mother and a child. In winter, when the child's hands are cold, the mother takes him a straw or a rush, bids him warm it, not for love of the straw to warm it, but to warm the child's hands by pressing them together. When the child falls ill, the mother for her sick child takes a candle and makes a vow in prayers. Again, coroners' rolls do provide us glimpses into daily life for peasant children. We have descriptions of little girls following their mothers around, helping their mothers to stir pots, helping them draw water, helping them gather fruit. We have descriptions of little boys helping their fathers in the field, following them off to work in the mill or to help them with fishing. And we also have descriptions of boys playing in combat. There's even this description of some boys getting into an accident when they started playing with a bow and arrow. Small children played, older children helped their parents and other relatives with the daily work around the farm. Boys went to the field to help the men, and girls helped around the house, so they were with the women, working during the day. For peasant children, medieval children growing up in a village, they lived really in close proximity to a very close-knit community, often with a lot of extended family. So there would have been uncles, aunts, cousins all around them, older sisters or girl cousins helping to, watch the very young children. Children had a lot of siblings and cousins. These would have been their playmates. So, of course, life was much more difficult than it is for us today. There were many dangers in a medieval farming community. But I do think for children growing up in this kind of close-knit community, there must have been something very psychologically healthy about it. There are some accounts that show us that life for medieval children could be very similar to, the lives that children lead today. There's this one interesting account from London in the 1180s by a writer named William Fitzstephen, which describes boys playing what is called football. And this is described as a popular sport. He tells us that each school or band of apprentices had its own ball. And he says that the boys' fathers would ride out on horseback to sit and watch their sons playing. And this helped them recapture the feelings of their youth. So this sounds a lot like an experience a lot of us have today of, families at the weekend ball game, parents watching their children play. So this was going on even back in the 12th century. William also describes boys engaged in ice skating, or something almost like proto-hockey. He says that boys would use skates made out of bone, and they would take these long poles, which they would use as their weapons, and they would rush at each other on the ice and attack each other in sort of play combat that seems almost like actual combat. He tells us this was a very dangerous sport, that boys could be very injured doing this, but he says they were undeterred, that they were very spirited and they wanted to compete with each other, and this was a great outlet for it. So again, not much has changed. So play fighting seems to have been a very popular game for medieval boys. In fact, we know that William of Tyre, who was the tutor of King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem when he was a child, he discovered that Baldwin was a leper, that he had the disease of leprosy, because when Baldwin was playing with his companions, they were playing basically a game of fighting each other. They were attacking each other very fiercely. And William noted that Baldwin did not seem to flinch at all or show any signs of pain from his injuries. And this is when he discovered that the boy, in fact, parts of his arm and hands were numb. And so this is how he discovered that he had leprosy. There is a very interesting account from a 12th century female physician who describes in a lot of detail care for newborn infants. She describes a procedure for tying the umbilical cord. She describes the proper bathing of the newborn. She even talks about clearing mucus from the throat and lungs. She recommends that the midwife rub the palate with honey and cleanse the tongue with warm water. She talks about protecting the newborn from bright lights and loud noises. And she recommends stimulating the baby's senses with colorful pictures, colored cloth, pearls, and songs and gentle voices. So peasant children would spend their childhood and indeed grow up and live and work right there with their immediate family, their immediate community. So they had a lot of continuity in terms of their environment, the people they lived and worked around. But for artisan boys, they would go off and apprentice in their particular trade. And the sons of aristocrats would do something similar, of course. They would go off to do kind of an apprenticeship as a knight in training at the court of a well-to-do relative or something like this. Noble children also often had tutors depending on the time and place. So someone who was charged with their education, and this could be learning to read, maybe rudimentary reading, or more reading or writing as we get later into the Middle Ages. Obviously, we start having very literate members of the aristocracy by the 12th century. They would learn things like court behavior, poetry, music, religion, this kind of thing. And this would be boys and girls. So boys and girls could learn to read. So it wasn't as if, girls were excluded from this sort of training. Girls would learn something about literature, something about music, that kind of thing. And of course, noble boys would be taught horsemanship and combat. They were learning to become knights. Their first teacher in this probably would have been their father, perhaps an older brother. Of course, then they would likely go off and serve at some other court, but still they may have relatives around them at this particular court, uncles, that sort of thing, cousins, maybe even some of their brothers were there. So they would be learning these skills of combat from close members of their family, or people who were in some way an ally to their family. Illegitimate children were not uncommon, especially among the aristocrats, and they were treated well. They weren't treated as if they were some sort of stain on the family. Usually they would not inherit the main title of the family, so if you were the illegitimate son of a count or a king, you could not become then the count or king, but you would have a place in the family's broader circle. They would be educated. They could have high-placed marriages. Like, as an example of this, Raymond IV of Toulouse, the Count of Toulouse, one of the leaders of the First Crusade, his third wife was a woman named Elvira, who was the daughter of King Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile. This was his illegitimate daughter, so she was not born to his wife. She was born to a concubine, but she was wed to one of the most important leading men of Christendom at that time. Raymond IV of Toulouse was wealthier, far wealthier than the King of France at that time. So this was a very good marriage she had, despite the fact that she was not born legitimate. So in some ways, childhood was very different in the Middle Ages than it is today. In some ways, it was very similar. Obviously, one of the big issues in the Middle Ages was infant mortality. The fact is that many children and babies died before they reached maturity, and this was, a source of great sadness to people when they endured this. There has been this idea presented that, okay, well, because in the pre-modern world, infant mortality was high, people didn't get as attached to their children just as a way of guarding themselves emotionally. But there's really no good evidence for this. In fact, the evidence suggests that people grieved the loss of their children. This is something that, it struck people very hard. It was a devastating thing in the same way that it is today. The fact is that people in the Middle Ages dealt with some of these harsher realities in a more immediate way, I think, than we do today. For us, death is a little bit more distant. It's something that we can kind of separate ourselves from. Often, the first time we really are impacted by death is maybe when a parent dies. I do think this is one reason why religion was so much more important in the Middle Ages, or why it kind of had this bigger presence for people. It was this thing that occupied people more deeply, spiritual matters, the afterlife, because people didn't have this illusion about being able to make this perfect world for themselves in the here and now. I think it's easier for us to delude ourselves longer about that in the 20th century, 21st century. But yeah, I don't think this should make us think in any way that people were less affectionate toward their loved ones. I think all evidence indicates that people felt the same sort of affection for their family members, for their children, that we feel today. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is a huge topic. There's a lot of stuff we could delve into when it comes to childhood in the Middle Ages. Let me know some areas that you guys think might be interesting to look at, because we could definitely do an entire video or several videos on more specific aspects of childhood in the medieval world. So anyway, good talking to you guys as usual. I'll talk to you soon.